heart disease and cancer together account for nearly half of all deaths, 48%. So more than 1/3 of adults, or about 78 million people, are overweight, obese, and arthritis is the most common cause of disability. So of the 53 million adults with a diagnosis of arthritis, more than 22 million say they have trouble with their usual activities because of arthritis. So now let's talk a little bit about the cost of these chronic conditions. 86% of all healthcare spending in 2010 was for people with one or more chronic medical conditions. You know, it's one thing to have something acute, to have an accident or something like this, but a chronic condition is something you live with day in, day out, and chances are it's preventable. At least 75 to 85% of disease is preventable. And so chronic conditions usually are the preventable type. So 86% of all healthcare costs are on these chronic conditions. The total costs of heart disease and stroke in 2010 were estimated to be $315 billion. And of this amount, $193 billion was for direct medical costs, not for nursing home care. Cancer care cost $157 billion in 2010. The total estimated cost of diabetes in 2012 was $245 billion, including $176 billion was in direct medical care costs, but $69 billion was in decreased productivity. So in other words, these people were absent from work, they couldn't go to work, they couldn't do their job while they're at work, or they got to where they couldn't work at all. So, I don't know about you, but I don't want to spend my money on healthcare costs. B, I don't want to have lost earnings, because the next thing I was going to say, that as far as arthritis goes, nearly $81 billion that was spent on arthritis was for direct medical costs, but $47 billion was indirect costs associated with lost earnings. So again, I don't want to have lost earnings, A. B, I don't want to spend my money that way. I'd rather have a new car or something nice, And C, I don't want to be sick. So what do we do? Because literally we're a nation that is sick and tired of being sick and tired. We're spending way too much on disease care. And so let's figure out what we can do to change this. You've heard the saying, you are what you eat. Well, others would say you are what you digest, and yet others would say you are what you ate. Your body is made up of everything you've been eating. So if you've been eating junk food and fast food, then your body is made up of junk. Because every cell in your body regenerates and is replaced. Literally, almost you have an entirely new body every year. A few things take longer, but some things you replace several times a year, some cells. But 1 year from now, you will basically have an entirely new body. So you're rebuilding your body with every bite you take, or you're tearing your body down. But the good news is that if you're eating healthy, or if you start eating healthy now, a year from now, you will have a different body, and you can change your future. So it's obvious that food has everything to do with what we're talking about. Japan has a 6 times lower rate of breast cancer than we have here in the United States. But when they move here and adopt our diet, they get the same cancer rates that we have. Hey, come on in. So, I want to explain to you just why this is so important, and just how disease starts in the bodies. Because, yes, food is obviously the most important thing that you're going to do to help your health, but it is not the whole story. So I want to tell you about a debate that's been going on for 150 years, at least since the 1800s, late 1800s, between the germ theory of disease that Louis Pasteur basically founded and started, versus the current theory at the time that terrain was everything. And when I say terrain, I mean your inner biological terrain, inside you, your gut, your cells, your blood, your body. So this debate was going on back then. Louis Pasteur's discovery that germs, a lot of diseases were caused by germs, was actually one of the most important medical discoveries in medical history. I mean, it's no doubt it has saved millions and millions of lives to learn that germs, are a cause of disease and how we can prevent them through antibiotics. And I oftentimes, every time I hear this, I think about that Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis. I don't remember how you pronounce his name. He was from Hungary, I believe, who back in 1847, now this is before the germ theory was discovered, before they knew anything about germs, but he was a doctor who was put over these two hospitals that delivered babies. One hospital was a medical facility that was a teaching hospital, and it was all male doctors. The other was midwives only, and so they delivered babies, and if you were needing a baby to be born this day, you would go to this hospital, but the next day, if your baby was born, you would go to the other hospital. They rotated back and forth to try to share, the workload. Well, the women that gave birth in the medical hospital, the teaching hospital, had a very high rate of death from childbed fever. Whereas the hospital where the midwives had a very low rate, like 4% death of any kind of infection or problem. And so he was assigned to figure out why. What was the difference? What was going on that the other death rate was so high? Women would literally rather give birth in the streets than go to the medical hospital because they knew their chances of dying were incredibly high. They would beg to get to go to the other one. But the system was in place. You had to go every other day. So he compared everything he could, and everything was basically the same. Until one day, he figured out one of his friends was doing an autopsy on a cadaver. So, the medical hospital, the teaching one, they did autopsies, and this guy was working on a cadaver, and the scalpel accidentally hit his friend and cut him. Well, that friend ended up dying of the same thing that the women were dying from, the childbed fever. And so they knew right then, okay, something from the cadavers is what was killing everybody. And so he set into motion rules of strict hand washing, and he would have them disinfect all their instruments and everything with chlorine. Now, he didn't know chlorine had germ-fighting properties. He just said that was the best thing that killed the putrid odor from the cadavers. So sure enough, when they implemented these techniques, the death rate dramatically fell in the medical hospital. And so this began then, years later, how they discovered that germs were a problem. Louis Pasteur was actually who discovered it, or at least he's the one given credit for it. There's debate over that, but I'm not going to get into all that. However, they wouldn't listen to this doctor. They said they didn't want to take blame that it was them causing the deaths of all these babies, and so they just literally refused to listen, didn't implement his techniques, and literally the man went mad. He went crazy because he tried so hard to get them to wash their hands, and they just said, no, this isn't the problem. And so he actually went mad, was put in an insane asylum, and 14 days later, the guards beat him, and he died from a result. So there you go. What is that? No good deed goes unpunished. I tell you, when it comes to medical stuff, you will be amazed at what goes on when you try to rock the boat of the conventional thinking. So here they had the idea that germs are this outside attackers that invade the body, and if we can develop an arsenal of weapons to kill them, then we can conquer disease, right? How's that been working for us? Really, the germ theory of disease did win out, and 150 years later, Orthodox medicine still goes by that, and, there's reason why. However, Antoine Béchamp was a contemporary of Louis Pasteur, and he held fast to the belief that the germs and microbes could only have an effect if the inner terrain of the body, if the immune system, if everything was right in your body, then the germs wouldn't take hold. They could only have their effect if the inner terrain was messed up, the internal environment of your body. So he held that what allows germs to proliferate isn't the germs themselves, but rather the environment in which the germs exist. Germs are pleomorphic, meaning that they can change size and shape depending on their environmental conditions. Béchamp recognized that germs are only harmful when they're in an environment that allows them to cause harm. He holds that disease is only and merely an end result of a state of malnutrition, and that the germs, microbes, bacteria, and viruses can and do only exist in an environment which is not in a state of perfect health. And we have ample evidence that individuals who are exposed to a virus or germ suffer no health problem from it. They've done throat cultures of random individuals, and they would indicate that they have a high presence of bacteria associated with pneumonia, yet none of the individuals came down with pneumonia. And so they didn't have it and they didn't come down with it, but they had pneumonia bacteria in their throats, same with strep. And so, if the germ theory of disease was 100% correct, then why, when we constantly breathe in 14,000 germs per hour, are we not all always sick? As one person said, if the germ theory of disease was 100% correct, we wouldn't even be here to discuss the theories because we would all be sick or dead. So why do only a few people get sick in an environment like a room where everyone's exposed, you touch the same things, you breathe the same thing, you eat the same food, and yet only some get sick and others don't, even though they were all exposed to the same thing? Again, Béchamp had a saying, treat the patient, not the infection, and says it's a mistake to kill the infection only rather than search for the cause as to why that individual, their immune system didn't handle the germ. But the other side says, at last we found the magic bullet, we found the demon that's causing all of our problems, and all we have to do is destroy the germs and never think about what are we doing to our bodies, what is the health of our bodies, what is the state of our environment of our bodies, and look at that. So again, the other side says disease is caused by an imbalance in the body. It could be nutritional, structural, electrical, toxicological, or biological. But let's look at reestablishing balance in the body and working with it, not against it. Rudolf Virchow is another father of medicine back in the day, and he said during the latter years of his career, if I could live my life over again, I would devote it to proving that germs seek their natural habitat, which is diseased tissue, rather than being the cause of the disease. In other words, mosquitoes seek stagnant water, but they don't cause the pool to become stagnant. So Béchamp's theory was supported in the early 1900s by a well-respected microbiologist, Rosenau, who claimed that bacteria can be harmless and turn into pathogens by altering their environment. He claimed to have seen typhoid bacteria change into a harmless enteric bacteria by changing the pH just a small amount, and then altering it back to a pathogen, again, by altering the pH back to the original. And other microbiologists found the same findings, but alas, Béchamp's theory was rejected in favor of Pasteur's, and Béchamp died a broken man as well. So, there are many things that come into play whether we get sick with an infection or not. You see some people who are constantly sick over and over and over, and others rarely ever get sick. So some of the things, our psychological state, again, we talk about our spirit, soul, and body, how our mind and will, emotions, our psychological state affects our health is one. Heredity, our nutrition, pre-existing health and stress, and the health of our microbiome or our gut health, the good bacteria in our guts, have just as much a role to play as the germs do. And Hippocrates, the father of medicine, wrote, "Disease does not occur unexpectedly. It is the result of constant violation of nature's laws. Accumulation of such violations transpires suddenly in the form of a disease." But it only seems sudden. It really has been, growing all this time. So a healthy or diseased terrain, that's what we're calling this, is determined primarily by four things: the acid-alkaline balance, or your pH, the electric-magnetic charge, whether it's negative and positive, its level of poisoning, such as with heavy metal toxicity or environmental toxins, pesticides, herbicides, things like that, and its nutritional status, so what you're eating, your water intake, things like that. Some other common causes that adversely affect our inner terrain are poor digestion. We already talked about stress and negative emotions, medications, inactivity, parasites and hidden infections, vaccinations, electromagnetic pollution, shallow breathing, not enough sunlight or good lighting, and structural imbalance. So these are some things that can affect our inner terrain. So let's look at how all this plays out. And I meant to bring my book, Cancer, Think Outside the Box by Ty Bollinger. I don't know if y'all have heard of him. He has a documentary called The Truth About Cancer. And so I'm glad I wrote down, I was going to read it out of his book, but I wrote it down. He says, this is taken from chapter 10, and the chapter is entitled Spoiled Rotten. So he says, a poor diet, poor digestion, a sluggish colon, reduced function of the liver, and faulty elimination from the kidneys all lead to increased toxicity and a lack of oxygen at the cellular level. The lack of oxygen at the cellular level creates the perfect environment for anaerobic microbes, such as bacteria, parasites, viruses, and fungi, to rapidly produce. If you don't have enough oxygen, this is why the shallow breathing is, can cause some of this. You've got to have good aerobic, get that blood flowing, get that breathing going, because oxygen deprivation will affect our cells. So once the body, specifically the liver, gallbladder, kidneys, and bowels, these are your elimination channels to get rid of toxins, loses their ability to process all the toxins and pollutants we're bombarded with every day, then the body's oxygen supply dwindles, the immune system begins to collapse, and the body's pH becomes more acidic. Therefore, it's a perfect breeding ground for deadly microbes and bacteria. Again, the viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungi act as the actual catalyst for cancer and nearly every other disease. Whether it's candida overgrowth, chronic fatigue, headaches, skin disorders, heart disease, gout, I could go on. It all starts with a toxic body that needs cleansing and brought back into health and balance. So let's talk about the effects of something as simple as the cold or flu, because how many people have had the flu recently? I mean, it's rampant. It's been on the news. How many people are hospitalized with the flu? The CDC estimates that more than 200,000 people are hospitalized each year with the flu or flu-related complications, and more than 36,000 people die. So, we think, well, the flu bug's not, you get the flu, but you don't think about how many people are dying. On average, up to 20% of the U.S. population gets the flu. It lasts about 4 days, and it costs us about $10 billion for doctors and hospital visits. And that's just the ordinary flu bug. That's not even to talk about the super bugs that are out there. So let's talk about the super bugs. In 2013, CBS Sunday Morning aired a segment about super bugs, and they had a specialist on there who spent 40 years devoted to studying super bugs. His name is Dr. Robert Mollering. When he asked about the threat posed by superbugs, superbugs are antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And so he said, we are very, very close to the edge of having totally non-treatable bacteria, putting us back to the pre-antibiotic era, where the mortality rates were very grim. It's a ticking time bomb because the bacteria are developing resistance mechanisms faster than we can find new antibiotics. It is, in a very real sense, an emergency. A few of the superbugs are already resistant to everything, and we're sure to see more of these as time goes on. So, we have things that'll kill germs, right? The germ theory, but these superbugs are not going to respond to antibiotics. So this is a problem. We might want to make sure our inner terrain is in good shape so that those germs won't have a place to land and grow. According to a landmark antibiotic-resistant threat report published by the CDC, 2 million American adults and children become infected with antibiotic-resistant bacteria every year, 2 million, and at least 23,000 of them die as a result of those infections. At least 23,000. Actually, the figure, some say as much as 60,000. And that doesn't include complications from it, that people die from complications. And of course, MRSA, we've all heard about that, the methicillin-resistant staph. kills more Americans each year than the combined total of emphysema, HIV/AIDS, Parkinson's, and homicide. Yeah. And this death toll really is just an estimate. The real number is likely much higher, but the true extent of superbug infections remains unknown because no one is really tracking them, at least not in the U.S. So the bottom line is, if all antibiotics fail, it will in effect mark an end to modern medicine as we know it now, and we are quickly heading in that direction. So if you can see that if the germ theory was 100% correct, and it isn't 100% correct, it would still be unable to help us fight off these superbugs that are antibiotic resistant. Therefore, we must take the approach that taking good care of our internal terrain is the most important thing we can do to prevent and fight disease of all kinds. So maintaining a healthy terrain is your first priority, and boosting your immune system is second. And one of the ways to do both of these things is to improve your gut health. The intestinal bacteria in your colon is super important to your health. 80% of your immune system is in your microbiome in your gut. Now, your microbiome is what holds all your good bacteria that helps fight the bad bacteria. And they do other things. They help digest your food and so on. So the old saying, death begins in the colon, really is true. Your microbiome is housed in your gut and other openings of your body, your mouth, your sinuses, so on. When your gut microbiome is balanced, you stay healthy. You're in a good mood and you have a lot of energy. Isn't that what we all want? When your gut microbiome is out of balance, you're setting yourself up for a host of health issues, including weight gain, diabetes, brain fog, Parkinson's, and cancer. Unfortunately, this unbalanced microbiome is very common. Dysbiosis is another term for it. Again, thanks to eating, fast processed foods that are, you've got your animals that are fed antibiotics and hormones, and then we eat them, we get them. Taking too many antacids, a lot of stress in our lives. All of these things impair our gut health. In fact, the allergies, children are also very susceptible to this because so many children now are born C-section and they're bottle fed. And so they don't get that good inoculation of the good bacteria right from the very start. They're starting at a disadvantage. And in fact, allergies, autoimmunity, anxiety, and depression that we see in increasing rates in children today are due in part to impaired gut health. So going back to the Truth About Cancer book, I want to read a little bit more about what he says. Did you know that your large intestine is often referred to as the mother of all organs? It is the first organ developed in the fetus. Why? Because it's the most important for the beginning anyway. Without a proper waste disposal, life would cease to exist before it even gets started. So imagine if our city's water sewer systems backed up into our streets and into our homes, or what if your own sewer system backed up into your home, or what if you didn't clean your house for a whole year? You can imagine the filthy environment, the trash, and how the germs and the bugs and the roaches and all of that get in there and set up disease. The Royal Society of Medicine did a major study and found that a dysfunctional large intestine is the major contributor to 85% of all disease and illness. The Royal Academy of Physicians of Great Britain identified 36 types of toxins that can form in the large intestine, get into the bloodstream, and literally destroy our bodies. So until this organ gets the attention that it needs and the help that it needs to be healthy, not only will you not prevent or reverse disease, but you will remain sick and tired of being sick and tired. The following are just some of the possible common symptoms of a colon that's toxic. Constipation or diarrhea, chronic yeast infections, chronic fungus on the hands or the toenails, the fingernails or toenails, depressed immune function leading to catching colds and flus all the time, weight problems, skin disorders of every kind, mood swings or depression, lack of concentration and short-term memory problems, sleeping problems, frequent headaches, chronic urinary tract infections and irritation, arthritic bone pains, allergies, gas and bloating, and general weakness and fatigue. So, again, this is so important to have our gut healthy. There's a Dr. Richard Schultz says that after 20 years of clinical experience, he's found that 80% of all maladies, no matter what it was, were cleared up within 2 weeks of cleaning the bowel. So detoxification is so important. It's so important to have a good inner terrain. And, it's the first place you should start if you're on the track to try to turn your health around. In theory, your body should be able to handle all the toxins and waste products that we're exposed to, but we're just too bombarded with too much. According to the Environmental Working Group, there are nearly 85,000 man-made chemicals currently approved for use in the United States, and that number is rapidly increasing. So, it's in the food you eat, it's in the water you drink, it's in the air you breathe, it's in the pesticides, the herbicides, the fungicides, it's in the fluorine in the water, it's industrial pollutants in the air. I mean, the list goes on of what we're bombarded with toxin-wise, and your body just simply cannot handle it after a while. You've got to detoxify your organs. So many, if not most, naturopathic doctors say detoxification is the most important thing you can do to have good health. And we may go into more detail next week on how to do the detoxification, some of the steps. You want to start with the colon, and then you can work towards detoxifying the liver and the gallbladder and the skin and blood, things like that. So we may cover some of that next week. We have a lot of detoxification products at the store. Harold was supposed to bring some, but we didn't. Did you bring? Okay. Okay. Well, we'll cover more of that. Hopefully next week we'll give you some concrete things to tell you how to detoxify your body. But once you cleanse and detoxify the colon, then what you need to do is restore that microbiome, get the good bacteria back in there. There are a number of factors that contribute to your microbiome, and so we need to do all those things, which is how much sleep you get, how much exercise you're getting, the food you eat, and so on. In functional medicine, there's a very successful protocol called the 4 R's, which stand for remove the toxins, replace the bad bacteria with the good, reinoculate with good bacteria, and repair. And there's a lot of resources out there, but there's one book in particular that's really good called The Microbiome Diet by Dr. Raphael Kelman. That would be a good book to get if you really want to go into more detail. It's called The Scientifically Proven Way to Restore Your Gut Health and Achieve Permanent Weight Loss. And we all want that, right? So once you remove the processed foods and toxins from your diet and get them out of your body, then the next thing we want to do is start, making sure what we put in there is good. So eat right, okay? So eat the right foods. Your gut microbiome responds to what you feed it. Literally, if you're putting processed toxic foods in there, it's going to react negatively. It's going to be unhealthy. So obviously, remove the sugar, the processed foods, refined carbohydrates, because the bad bugs feed off of that sugar. And so you're actually helping the bad ones be more and the good ones less. Eat a pH-balanced diet of 80% alkaline-forming foods and 20% acid-forming foods. So, Harold, can you be passing out those charts? What we have here is a chart of foods starting from the most alkaline, and then, less alkaline toward less acid towards very acid. And so you want to keep the parts that's over here in the very acid to about 20%, and 80% over here on the left side of the page, where it's mostly alkaline forming foods. But of course, the most common foods that we all eat are acid forming. So sugar, of course, beef, coffee, soft drinks. As someone over there is drinking one, who will remain nameless. It's interesting that stress and negative emotions also create an acidic environment in the body. Isn't that interesting? Poor food combinations, which is another subject for another day, is another thing that will cause acid in the body. Oh yeah, and white flour, that's another very acid-forming foods. So all of your sweets that are made with sugar and white flour, they're very acidic. There's a really good book out there also called Alkalize or Die. That is, if you want to know more, get into more detail about that, that's a really good book on that. So we've talked about, let's see here, we've got to eat the right foods. A, by removing sugar and processed foods. B, eat a pH balanced diet of 80% alkaline, 20% acid forming foods. C, we want to get our carbohydrates from vegetables and low sugar fruits. Eating a lot of green leafy vegetables will help your gut and implant it with good bacteria. But again, I would recommend, if you haven't already, be checking your blood type diet to see which vegetables you should be eating, because again, one of the next ones is make sure you're not eating foods that you're allergic to or have food sensitivities to, because that's going to cause problems. That's going to cause, gas, cramping, stomach pain, things like that. And some of the most common food allergies or sensitivities are to cow's milk, soy, peanuts, corn, eggs, and wheat. Some people find they feel better if they eliminate all grains, and especially the type A and O's, which is the majority of the people, should stay away from those. Artificial sweeteners, alcohol, coffee, these are all things that are very acid forming and not good for us. Include fermented foods in your diet. Laura alluded to that last week, by drinking that kombucha, that is really good, but eating sauerkraut and yogurt, kefir, things like this is a really good way to get your good bacteria up. And then take a high-quality probiotic, a good acidophilus product that has all of the good bacteria in it. This is going to be really critical to helping get that ecosystem of the gut back in good shape. And especially if you take antibiotics, you have got to take probiotics while you're taking them and afterwards, because the antibiotics are killing out all your good bacteria, destroying your gut microbiome. I mean, the very most important thing we need for good health, and then antibiotics are really wreaking havoc on it. And they leave you very vulnerable then to get another infection, because antibiotics kill out all bacteria, both the good and the bad. Well, which is the first to come back and set up in another infection? The bad. And that's why people oftentimes have recurring infections. They no sooner get over it and get off the antibiotic, and 2 weeks and 2 months later, they're back again with another one. And so we've got to be sure to replant that good bacteria. And then digestion is another very important thing to help with the gut microbiome. If you're taking antacids or acid-blocking drugs, this is really, really damaging your whole inner terrain. So we've got to address digestion. If you are on any of those things, you can just start at least by taking apple cider vinegar, a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in water, and drink that with your meals. But it could be that you need to get some hydrochloric acid or some digestive enzymes with your food. If you're having heartburn, and a lot of people think, I've got too much acid, so what do? We take antacids. And then what happens 4 hours later, we have rebound acid reflux because we get too alkaline in the stomach. The stomach is supposed to be acidic. Acid needs to be there, A, to break down your minerals, to break down your protein, but also to kill any germs or microbes or viruses or bacteria or parasites that might be in your food. Your stomach acid should just deal with it. But when you don't have good stomach acid because you're taking antacids, or you're low in stomach acid anyway, type A's are very low in stomach acid, then you're prone to get the ulcers from H. pylori. You're prone to get sick a lot. So you've got to make sure you have good digestion. If you're having any bloating, any gas, any indigestion, heartburn, it's vital that you correct that. And so taking digestive enzymes, doing the apple cider vinegar, if vinegar is okay for your blood type. There's some people who shouldn't do it. You need to know. But this is so important to get that fixed, and we've got some really great digestive enzymes at the store. And then, of course, stress, relaxing. It's interesting that stress and negative emotions cause the body to become acidic, whereas calm and peace and prayer and things like this actually help alkalize the body. Isn't that interesting? So, every time you sit down to eat, take a deep breath, pause and give thanks for the food, and make sure it's good and healthy. And like everything else, there's not a one-size-fits-all that when it comes to your microbiome, whether you're a strict vegetarian or eating the paleo, you need to figure out what's right for you, but that will be what will help you be the healthiest. All right, so do we have any questions? Well, I covered all that in 30 minutes. Yes. Yes. Okay, so there was a program on Dr. Ozzy a while back about a boy who was very listless, just sick, basically. And nothing they did seemed to help him, so they finally decided to implant his mother's species in his gut because, again, the mother has the good bacteria, and that fixed him right up. And there have been many stories, actually, of that happening. What do they call that? They have a name for that. I don't remember what it's called, but something implantation. But it's very important. It's so important, this gut microbiome. It's the inner terrain that's going to keep you healthy. And when things get bad, you're going to be glad you have a good one. Yes. It's interesting. I think they probably did do that, and it wasn't enough. I don't know. I don't know. I wonder if he was never inoculated with his mother's microbiome to begin with. Nowadays they say, when the baby's born through the birth canal, it picks up the mother's microbiome there, and then when she breastfeeds, it gets the colostrum, it gets it there, and then, just even laying on the mother skin to skin, this helps get their microbiome. I wonder, did he get any of that? Was he born C-section? Was he bottle fed? Was he on antibiotics? I don't know, but yeah, we don't know. But it seemed like that's what it took to do it, and I've heard many stories like that. Well, once you do a good colon cleanse, kind of do all the steps. Once you do a colon cleanse, then maybe do the liver and then the gallbladder. There's kind of a step or progression that you should do because you don't want to be trying to detoxify the blood when your colon's still toxic. So there's steps, a certain order you want to do it in. Once you've done that, then there are some products that you can maintain detoxification with. And so that works great. Again, it will depend on how healthy you're eating or not, how many toxins you're exposed to, things like this. But some really believe that an everyday thing. They even make teas called daily detox teas that just every day help you deal with the toxins you're getting in your body every day. And I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with that, provided it's herbs that's good for your blood type. I'm going to keep hammering that home. And I hope next week that we'll go into some really concrete steps of what to do for detoxification. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, electromagnetic pollution. So we have, oh, yes, very good. So she wanted to know what were some examples of the electrical magnetic causes of disease. We mentioned there are 4 things that can mess up your terrain, and electrical magnetic was one of them. So there are electromagnetic fields all around us, and we're exposed to so much electromagnetic pollution between our Wi-Fi's, our cell phones, our televisions, computers, microwaves. There's so much of that goes on that messes up our own electrical systems. And so I hope to have a day where I go into detail about how we can protect ourselves from electromagnetic pollution, because that is one of the 8 pillars of health, is making sure that you keep that down because it can really mess up your electrical system. And we are electric, you know, there's no doubt about that. What? Why don't you bring it for next week? All right, well, are there any other questions? All right, why don't we take about a 10, 15-minute break, 10-minute break? What time is it? It's about 7 after. Let's come back about 7:20. Is that enough time? And we'll get into a part 2 of Soul Wounds by Gail Winter.